Hilo, Waimea, and Puna. And we're expanding. And then on Maui, just recently opened a chapter. So we're just trying to expand. It's kind of interesting because it's very exciting times as far as what's happening with the movement. Primarily Honolulu, we just did education. We were on hold for a while, but since they did the renovation, we started up again, even though we might change venue. So tonight we have Donovan come speak to us again. This is probably the third time here, but I'll probably 90% of the information he'll speak on will be new to me because I only very limited capacity as far as how much I can. So let's please all welcome Donovan.
Hello, Michael.
Aloha.
So I'm just going to read real quickly off of today's presentation is titled, does anyone know how to pronounce it correctly? Is it Naboth? Naboth's Vineyard?
Naboth?
Naboth?
I think Naboth, but who goes to church and who can tell us?
Naboth's Vineyard. I didn't go to Christian school in Chicago, so I don't know the pronoun. But this is basically a quote from Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen. And in that book, she makes allusion to the coveting of Naboth's vineyard. And I've taken that and used that vineyard to symbolize both Hawaii more generally, but also more specifically the Crown Lands. So, just a brief introduction. This is a response to an editorial in the West Hawaii Today titled Hawaiian Lands Not Stolen. And in that video, wrote a 12-page paper or so and posted that on my Facebook. But I didn't think that editorial was going to gain traction. And when it first came out, someone asked me to respond, and I was like, there's no way that people aren't going to take that seriously. Then it got taken seriously, gained traction, and I got a second phone call from someone else who I highly respect, and that was basically the write a response. So wrote a response, and it's basically my 180-page master's thesis in 12 pages instead of 108. Still dense. People still tell me it's 10 pages too long. But being an academic, I can't shorten it because all of the detail is important, right? So I'm going to start off today with a short video from YouTube, just giving some people an introduction to the story of Naboth's Vineyard if you're not familiar. So I'd like to start with that, then I'm going to show another YouTube video response that I think is applicable to what is going on around us today. And by the end of the video, you should start to see the parallels between the prophetic, in a sense, for Lili'u Kalani to be using that story.
A long time ago, Israel had a king called Ahab. His wife, who was not very nice, was called Jezebel. King Ahab of Israel had a beautiful palace with a beautiful garden. The garden had every kind of flower, but there was no room for vegetables in it. A He repented all that he had done and begged for forgiveness. God was happy that Ahab had repented and didn't punish him harshly. He decided Ahab wouldn't suffer in his own time, but none of his family would be kings again.
So that's the general story there. Here we are going to have a quick little insights.
They lost vineyard. The killing of Naboth seemed to tip the scales for God. It's like with all of Ahab's wickedness, God was so patient with him. But when Ahab killed Naboth and stole his vineyard, God was saying, that's it. That's enough. You've gone too far. My patience is at an end. You see, you would think that in comparison to his many other wickedness, that this would not be very big, but in God's eyes it was. Ahab violated two laws of God that were very precious to him. Not that all the laws aren't, but that two laws God seems to value highly. One is the ancestral claim upon the land. How land was to be passed down from one generation to the other. God even made provision that if a person sold the land, that in the year of Jubilee, the land would come back. That was it, and that was every 50 years. So when land was sold, it was sold in proportion to how many more years before the year of Jubilee. If it was 49 years before, well, then you give a lot. But if the year of Jubilee was just the next year, you wouldn't get much at all. So the law was set up. God meant for land to stay in families. And also, using the justice system to kill Naboth. God's value of weights and balances, using the justice system. God, with these two things, God said, that's it. You've gone too far. Well, now, why did they use the justice system? Well, it was very important to use the justice system because if they had just killed Naboth, well, nothing would be gained. The land would just simply pass down to Naboth's family, either the children or some relative. But if he was condemned as a criminal, that meant that the government could then claim the land, and that's exactly what Ahab did. Yet in this story, we see God's mercy one more time. Ahab repents. God says he's truly sorry. He doesn't put back the judgment, but he passes the judgment down to Ahab's son. Now, his son was Jehoram. So when Ahab died, it says the dogs licked up his bones, and that's a partial fulfillment. But the dogs licked up his bones in Samaria, not in Jezreel. When Jehoram died, his dead body was thrown into the field of Naboth. This field, which Ahab wanted so much, was a curse to his family. It caused him to die, his wife to be eaten by dogs, his children to die, and the entire heritage, the entire dynasty, the entire family name destroyed because it was one field. So much we can learn here. Well, come back next week when we continue on with more insights on the story of the week. We'll see you next week.
Right, so why I chose to include that second video was because of that insight about using of the justice system, right? And you think about what's going on around us today on Mauna Kea, the criminalizing of the Kia'i, the need for the narrative to be they are the lawbreakers, we are the law followers, right? And the criminalization of one and the use of the justice system for states of emergency, and really, really interesting parallels for me. The Queen wrote the quote, her quote, not mine. Her allusion, her parallel. Title of my talk today is Nabob's Vineyard, the Crown Land's Transmutation from Private to Public Property. And this is basically a story of how public property was transmuted, was converted into public property, right? And we're talking 25% of Hawaii. Crown lands consist of 25% of Hawaii, and that point there about converting private to public property is a big one, right? This is the United States Constitution, 5th Amendment. You cannot take private property for public use without compensation. Yet that's exactly what was done, right? So the Crown lands today, not an issue of sovereignty, right? We don't have to talk occupation, we don't have to talk 1893, we don't have to talk any of these illegalities. This is just straight land title. As a matter of land title, the state of Hawaii does not own 25% of Hawaii today, right? That's essentially what we're talking about here. I'm going to start off today's talk with, I'll say brief, but it's 20 slides, a brief introduction, background into Western property law, but all of this is significant for Hawaiian property law, and we'll start to see why. What it means to own land. This is a topic for another day, but I would just like to plant this seed for people to think about it. I often hear Hawaiians say Hawaiians didn't own land. And if people don't problematize that statement, I think that's a very, very... If I'm the state of Hawaii, I want you to think Hawaiians didn't own land. Okay? And I'll just leave that there for a second and we can come back to that at the end. But this idea of owning land, ownership is complicated in the Western context, right? It's hard for Western lawyers to explain what owning land in the Western sense means. So when we just broadcast, generalize, and give away the whole concept, right? Maybe we didn't have 1/10 of the concept, but 9/10 we did. Did we use land? Yes. Did we exclude people from land? Yes, right? What's a pu'uhonua? That means the state cannot come, the executioner cannot come and get you. There is a boundary. That's an exclusion, right? Story of Umi. Akahia Kuleana tells Umi, go to Hilo, because your brother Hakau does not have jurisdiction in Hilo. He has jurisdiction only in Hamakua. That's a boundary, right? So this notion that Western peoples had boundaries and Hawaiians didn't, very problematic, right? And then you give away the whole concept, and then you have to fight back to get the concept, right? Because if Hawaiians didn't own land, then Hawaii's not yours. Then you gotta fight back to a baseline to get back to the baseline before you can say Mauna Kea is ours, right? I start from this baseline. Hawaiians own land, it's ours. Then the fight's much shorter, right? And I just ask people to problematize that statement and not just broadcast generalization. If you're gonna say it, understand why you're saying it, right? But there's a lot more nuance that needs to go into that idea. Owning land. 3 main ideas go into Western property law. Duration, how long, the nature of ownership. This is where Western property law introduces the idea of bundle of sticks, the nature, what kind of sticks do you have, how many sticks do you have, and the third idea is quantity, how much of each stick. Do you have the full stick? Do you have half a stick? And it's a combination of these, essentially two things. Which sticks do you have and how much, that make up this idea of estates. If you have all of the sticks and they're all maximum size, then you have the largest form of ownership, which is fee simple absolute. If you have 4 of the sticks but not this stick, then it's called leasing. If you have 3 of these sticks and not these 2 sticks, then it's called another concept. So it's this combination of how many sticks do you have and to what degree do you have each stick, right? And that's what I'm talking about with problematizing the idea that Hawaiians didn't own land. We didn't have one of those sticks. We didn't have that stick that says, I can sell it, I can dispose of the land. We had the other 4 sticks, right? So when you say we don't own land, you give away those other 4 sticks, and then you gotta fight for them back. We already had them. Traditionally, before any Westerners came, we had those sticks. There are traditional examples of those things. So duration takes 2 forms. It's, do you hold land from the king or do you hold land separate from the king, right? So in Western property law, we're talking about feudalism. And the period before allodial title, before freehold title, before private property was the period of feudalism, right? So in the one context, we're talking about allodial title or private title means this is a system separate from that system called feudalism, right? Where you held land, I give you land, you give me service, right? Then Europe evolved to you hold land in private property separate from the king. You don't have that service for obligation, right? And this is called freehold or allodial. And those terms are often interchangeable. Well, those terms in some contexts are synonymous, in some contexts they mean different things. This is one context that that word freehold is used. And all of these concepts are in Hawaiian land documents, which is why I'm introducing them to you now. Right? If we're talking about the context of you hold land separate from the king, then duration is getting at, do you hold it indefinitely or definitely? Do you hold it for a term of years, 2 years, 1 month, 3 years, definite time period? Do you hold it indefinitely until I die? When am I going to die? I don't know. Indefinite, right? So you have these 2 different measures here. Do you hold it definite, specified time period? A lease for 30 years, a lease for 1 year, definite. Indefinite, for as long as grandma is alive, right? 2 different ways. And this is, this introduces us to freehold and leasehold, right? Indefinite period, freehold, definite period, leasehold. Within this freehold indefinite period, we have 2 different categories. You have fee and you have life estates. A fee, I hold the land indefinitely. There is no sand in the hourglass ticking away. I don't know when I'm going to die. I don't know when I'm going to sell it. I hold it hypothetically for forever. A life estate is an indefinite period measured for the duration of a person's life. As long as grandma is living in the house, grandma can stay there. How long is grandma going to be alive? We don't know. 1 year, 30 years, you don't know, right? So both of these introduce us to 2 of the 3 major estates. Fee simple, life estate, and the third we were introduced to, leasehold. The important thing here when understanding Hawaiian land documents is this term freehold or allodial answers two different questions. The first question, do you hold this land from the king or separate from the king? Talking about two different periods of time. Kalai aina, private property in Hawaii. Feudalism, private property in the Western system. Okay? The other context that the word freehold or allodial is used is, do you hold this land for an unspecified period or a specified period? Unspecified, freehold. Specified, leasehold. Right? So here we see the same word, freehold, can often be synonymous or used. So you just have to understand that in one context, it's talking about before private feudalism versus private property. In another context, it's talking specifically within the realm of private property. Is this for a specific duration or for an indefinite duration? Okay. And we're going to see all of these terms are in our Hawaiian land documents. And all of these terms are at the center of things like royal patent grants and these other things that come up in our community today. Next, we're going to talk about nature, or what is the nature, what sticks do you hold? And this introduces us to the bundle of sticks metaphor. And in the bundle of sticks metaphor, there are 5 major sticks. And these 5 sticks go by the acronym of Deep Sea, DEEPC. And this Deep Sea acronym, each of those letters stands for a different stick, right? First stick, disposition, enjoyment, exclusion, possession, control. And this is what I'm talking about. Did Hawaiians control land? Yes. Did Hawaiians possess land? Yes. Did Hawaiians exclude others from land? Yes. Did Hawaiians have the right of enjoyment of land? Yes. Did Hawaiians dispose of land? No. But that's only one of the 5 sticks, right? So this is where I say we need to problematize that idea Hawaiians didn't own land. Because 4 of these things we did do. We didn't do the one, right? So we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater and give the whole idea of ownership away. Disposition is the right to sell or give the property to another, to leave it in your will, right? To sell it, to alienate it. Enjoyment, to possess the property without outside interference. Exclusion, to keep others from using the property. Right? This was the pu'uhonua. If someone made it to the pu'uhonua, the executioner could not pass that boundary. Possession, the legal right to occupy the property, and control, the legal right to use the property for whatever use you see fit. You want to grow kalo, you want to grow uala, you want to grow peaches, you want to grow whatever. So these are the 5 sticks, Deep Sea. These are the major components of Western property law. Quantity. Do you have an unlimited amount or is it limited? Do you have the maximum amount possible? Do you have a portion of it? Do you have a limitation? Is it constrained in any way? Right? So like I said, if we're talking about fee simple absolute, you have all 5 sticks and you have the full length of all 5 sticks, right? And that's one extreme where you have all the sticks and the full quantity. And different estates, you have more or less of a disposition, you have more or less exclusion, you have more or less of the different sticks. I love this one. Appurtenances, and this is basically, this is an image, this is a metaphor for the South, but this is, the fleas come with the dog. You gotta take the good with the bad. You bought a land subject to the rights of native tenants, The fleas come with the dog, right? And this is where, if you realize that later I'm going to be talking about how the Maile was a Hawaiian thing, right? And those Hawaiian things that were put in there are the fleas that are bothering the state of Hawaii. The fleas that are bothering current landowners today who want to own property as if we were in America, but they didn't know that Hawaiian property law is different. Well, I'm sorry, the fleas came with the dog, right? And all of those things, all of those fleas subject to the rights of native tenants, undivided interests, undivided rights, are irritating that dog today, right? And this is where we cannot give up those fleas. Our ancestors codified Hawaiian custom, put it into law, and those things are attached to the land today. That's how Western property rights works, right? They are attached to the land, they go with the land whether you like it or not. If we forget that, then that's our loss. If we give that away and say, oh, those fleas aren't ours, subject to the rights of native tenants, oh, that was a foreign imposed thing, that's not helping Hawaiians. Our ancestors left us gems. We just need to become educated on what those gems are. Can't sell what you don't have. I can sell you the Brooklyn Bridge, but if I don't own it, you can only get from me what I own. Right? You can only sell what you got. If I only got 2 sticks, I can't sell you 5. I can purport to sell you 5, but that doesn't mean you have 5. You can only get from me what I got. If I only got the D and the C, you don't have the E, E, P. Right? You can only sell what you got. So I'm going to tie this all together with a quick example here. Fee simple. What is the fee measuring? What is the simple measuring? Right? The fee, measure of duration. Right? The simple, fee, indefinite duration. Right? The simple is getting at the nature. It's getting at one of the sticks. And it's that stick called disposition. Right? It's limited. It's talking about the inheritance. That disposition stick, do you have the full stick or do you have half the stick? Is inheritance limited or is inheritance not limited? Is my right to sell limited or is my right to sell not limited? Right? In terms of fee simple, it's not limited. You have the full stick. There are no conditions, there are no limitations. Fee simple. Right? If we're going to talk about an example where inheritance is limited, that's called a fee tail. Right? A fee tail is where limited does not go generally to anyone. It is, inheritance is limited to a specific entity. An example of this from Europe is in the 1600s, my land would be inherited by my eldest son. Second son, you're sucking eggs. Daughters, you're sucking eggs. It's going to one entity, the eldest son. That is not a fee simple. That's a fee tail. And that fee tail tells you inheritance goes to one entity. This concept of fee tail and limitation on inheritance is very, very important for us to understand to the tune of 25% of Hawaii. 25% of Hawaii is affected by this definition and whether you know the difference between a limitation on inheritance or not. Okay? This is not semantics. This is 25% of Hawaii. Right? Right? In a fee simple, the quantity is not limited, in a fee tail, inheritance limited. You don't have the full stick. Fee simple absolute, the duration, indefinite duration, fee simple. Another example is if you're still looking at that defeasibility stick, that one bundle of stick, the D in the deep sea, defeasibility, your right to transfer. Right? Fee simple absolute has no limitations. An example of something that has limitations is a fee simple conditional. Or, I'm sorry, a fee simple defeasible. A fee simple defeasible says you can own this property as long as you're using it for a church. Once you stop using it for a church, then it reverts back to the owner. Right? So there's a condition there. Yes, you own this property, and as long as you're using it, meeting condition A, it's yours. Once condition A is not met, it goes back to the owner. There are lots and lots of properties in Hawaii like this. Right? So this is an example of a fee simple defeasible rather than a fee simple absolute. Fee simple absolute, all the sticks, no limitations. Fee simple, fee tail, limitation on inheritance. Fee simple defeasible, limitation on the defeasibility stick. Right? There's a condition. You can't use it for anything, you only can use it for a particular condition that was set. These definitions are whether you understand who owns 25% of Hawaii or not. Right? That's what's at stake here. Questions before we move on? 5 weeks of real property law, right?
When you say that 25%, what 25% are you referring to?
Prominence. Prominence.
That's what I
These definitions are talking about the prominence.
It's okay, you just answered the question.
Naboth's vineyard. We're talking about Naboth's vineyard.
Could you put fee simple tail into your trust?
There's no fee simple tail because simple and tail are two mutually exclusive things. Simple, I have the whole thing. Tail, it's limited.
So you could put it where your inheritance of your lands go to tail, whereas your family owner is not in-law.
Yep. You do whoever. Yep. But in doing so, you're limiting the inheritance, which then you're limiting that one stick, which now it's no longer a fee simple, now it's a fee tail. But with that said, in America, America doesn't do fee tails. This is a British thing. This is a European thing, right? So is it surprising to you that an American trained lawyer who's not trained in fee tails would not be familiar and would not look at a Hawaii situation and say, oh, that's a fee tail? If you're not trained in the concept, because the concept is not in use in American property law. Right?
And the reason we don't have the D stick is because it's crown lands. You said earlier we had 4, but we didn't have the D stick, the disposition.
Well, even that's problematic. So I said we didn't have the disposition stick traditionally, but that's somewhat false because Kamehameha the Great starts the disposition thing, right? With the 4 Kona uncles, Kamehameha the Great gives land in hereditary succession to the 4 Kona uncles. Prior to the 4 Kona uncles, there was not a hereditary right to land. Land always went back to the person we got it from. Kamehameha the First, to thank the 4 Kona uncles for helping him unify Hawaii, these lands are for you, they revert to your children, right? So Kamehameha the First started to give us the disposition stick. Was it a blanket across Hawaii? No, but it did start. But that was after Western contact, so you can decide for yourself how you want to interpret whether that was an European imposition on Kamehameha or that was him appropriating. Right? But that's where we have to think too, right? At that point, the metaphor for Pono changed. Kamehameha the First is the first mo'i to unify the Hawaiian Islands. At that point, how you maintain peace changes because you are now in a different context from any other chief who had ruled in Hawaii. No other chief had to maintain peace with a unified 4 island kingdoms. So does that change how you rule? Because the context is now different. There's no chief on Maui, you just beat him. There's no chief on Kauai, right? Yes, there are rebellions and it's not that simple, I'm oversimplifying, but he also unified all the islands. He defeated all the people who would rise against him. Now the new threat is from Europe, right? So now we're getting into complicated interpretation stuff. So, with all of this said, there is a huge misunderstanding in Hawaiian land law, right? And this misunderstanding is acknowledged by all of the Maile scholars, right? Chinen, in his book, The Great Maile, the most important event in the reformation of the land system in Hawaii was the Great Maile of 1848. However, the Great Maile is still surrounded by confusion and misunderstanding. Right? He's writing in the 50s saying there's still misunderstanding. We still don't understand this process right. The misunderstanding is we don't know who has how many sticks. Excuse me. We don't know who has what sticks and how much of the sticks at what point in the Maile process. Right? The way the Maile has been described is basically in a procedural type explanation. Do step 1, do step 2, do step 3, do step 4, do step 5, you have title. What do I have at step 1? I don't know, but you need to do step 2. Why? I don't know. It's part of the process. Do step 2. Stop talking bad. Right? But we don't understand what sticks do I have at step 2? What stick does step 3 give me? What does step 4 give me? Right? We understand it procedurally. You need to get your land commission award. You need to file your claim, get your land commission award, do this, get your survey, get your royal patent. What does the royal patent give me? I don't know. Title. Well, what does that mean? Right? And I'm going to show you the acknowledgement of this lack of definition. Right? So we don't know who has how much when. We don't know who has how much title when. The certificates of award issued by the Land Commission to successful claimants for all but Kuleana claims purported to convey to the awardee a freehold title less than a lodeo, while awards on Kuleana claims did not specify the character of the title conveyed. Neither the statute creating the Land Commission nor the principles defined the nature of a freehold estate less than a lodeo. Right? So what Canalora is saying here, and Canalora is a land title guy, right? These aren't historians, these are land title lawyers, right? Writing in the 70s. He's saying this term here is neither defined in this thing or that thing, and it doesn't define that term. Right? Okay, well maybe that term is in one land document. What's the big deal? Making a big deal out of nothing here. Right? So a freehold title less than a lodeo, right? And here we see our terms that we were introduced to earlier: freehold, a lodeo. Right? Neither the statute nor the principles define freehold estate less than a lodeo. Right? So I mean, our misunderstanding of the Maile, according to Chinen and Canalora, is a base level of definition. We do not have a definition of the terminology involved. That's how basic our misunderstanding is. We cannot define the terms. This is a land title guy telling you he can't. He works for Security Title or some other title corporation, right? This is a guy who does land title for a living telling you we don't have a definition of title. Not a historian.
With all of that reading that they're going through it, they could not infer what the definition of some of those terms would be.
As an aside, if you go to page 10 of Chinen, Chinen includes Land Commission Award number 433, which has a definition of this. Doesn't mention it in his book, doesn't mention it anywhere else. But there's 100 out of 10,000 Land Commission awards that have this definition. 1%. You have a 1% chance, on average, right, of finding this term in a Land Commission award. And he chooses one, and it's in his book. It's been under our nose. It's been under every single land lawyer's nose in Chinen on page 10. It's under Canalora's nose. If he read Chinen page 10, he'd find a Land Commission award that defines it. But they don't, for whatever reason. So here we have confusion. Freehold less than allodial, don't know what it means. And here's our important terms, freehold, allodial, right? What do these terminologies mean? Basic terminology, probably. So here's Royal Patent number 1111. This is the Royal Patent on claim number 4033, the one I just spoke about that is in Chinen. Whereas the Board of Commissioners to quiet land titles have by their decision awarded unto William Croningberg claim number 433 an estate of freehold less than allodial. This term is in the typescript of this template. It's not in the handwritten part. It's not something that's written in by hand on a special case. This is the typescript template of every single royal patent. So basically every royal patent, we don't know what freehold less than allodial means. We know William Croningberg got awarded a freehold less than allodial, but we don't know, we, Chinen and Canalora, don't know what that term means. So what does Croningberg got? What does he have? This is a contemporary source, TG Hawaii, right? So this is title guarantee. You go to title guarantees glossary, and they rehash a definition. A patent that was issued upon payment of commutation to the awardee of a land commission. Such royal patent on the award conveyed no title. Right? So let's just focus there. Royal patent on the award conveyed no title, but merely indicated that the government's interest in the land had been settled. Right? So think about this. Title guarantee from their website. In their glossary, the largest title company in Hawaii puts a definition of royal patent that says a royal patent conveyed no title. Right? So this is the current dominant definition, understanding of what a royal patent is. No title. So why do I need it? Why do I need this document that conveys no title, which is step 5 of 5 in the process? Right? I don't know what you need it. It's step 5. If you don't have it, you don't have title. So let's go on to define freehold less than allodial. Here we have the law Ekanawai. This is the law allowing aliens to purchase lands. Ho'opau ina pilikia e hiki ole. Let me read it here. Ho'opau ina pilikia e ku'ai ai to'olilo I ka aina make ano alorio. Right? So this is the land allowing aliens, na haole ho'ihiki ole, allowing aliens to purchase to ku'ai lands in 1850, right? And the good thing here is in the 1850s, laws are printed in Hawaiian and English. So you can have a contextual definition of the Hawaiian, alodio, and we'll look at the English and see what the English means, right? To abolish the disabilities of aliens to acquire and convey lands in fee simple, right? So according to this source, the Hawaiian says alodio, the English says fee simple. What's the definition of alodio? Fee simple. Section 43 of the Civil Code. A royal patent shall issue in fee simple any government land. Let me read the whole thing. A royal patent signed by the king and countersigned by the Kohina Nui and the ministers of interior shall issue under the great seal of the kingdom to the purchaser in fee simple of any government land or to any holder of land of an award from the Board of Commissioners to quiet land titles. If you remember what title guarantees document said, title guarantee says a royal patent gave you no title. What does the Civil Code say? A royal patent shall issue in fee simple. If you have a royal patent, you have the fee. How do we get to a royal patent gives you a fee, a royal patent conveys no title? Okay? I merely bring this to show you how profound the misunderstanding of the Maile is by competent, titled people today. This is not to throw TG under the bus, this is to show authorities of today do not understand the Maile. Right? And here's the evidence of that misunderstanding and that lack of definition. Right? Such royal patent on award conveyed no title. A royal patent shall issue in fee simple to any holder of an award from the Land Commission. One says I have a fee simple, one says it conveys no title. There is a huge misunderstanding here, as evidenced through this one term. So if we take a look at Land Commission Award number 433, and we do therefore award to the claimant William Cronenberg a freehold title less than a lodio, or in other words, a life estate, which he may commute for a fee simple title as prescribed by law. Okay? Definition exists. You just have to read one of the 120 something Land Commission awards that mentions the word out of 10,000. Right? Definition's there, you gotta look into primary sources. Right? If you're going to do Maile research, you have to look at the primary sources. You cannot be secondary source based and understand the Maile. There is no book that I can point you to that will explain the Maile. Unfortunately, you have to read tens of thousands of primary source land documents and build the explanation that way. Right? That book does not yet exist.
Is that your thesis?
Part of it, yeah. But I haven't started putting it into a book yet to make available larger. But there is something available, but it's not. And others have started to write too. But there is no comprehensive book to the degree that's needed.
Is there an incentive for the title guarantee to have that definition the way that they set it up, to say that the royal patent does not convey a title? Is there like a conflict of interest there for them? Like, is there some reason why they purposefully do that, or do you think it's just accidental? Or that they didn't know?
If you make a mistake in title, the liability involved with one house lot today is $1 million, right? Or what is the median price of a home? That's how large the liability is for one mistake on one house. How many of these documents have that term? Right? So
it's not in their interest to mistake the term.
You're putting me on the spot here. Anyone who is guaranteeing title and holds the liability for title insurance, any mistake like this would have profound consequences. I don't know that it's intentional. I cannot speak that they're intentionally burying it. It takes, you would literally have to read all 10,000 land commission words. I know maybe 4 people who've read more than 100, right? So it's just one of those things. It wasn't available. You'd have to go to the archives and put in the microfilm and spend 8 hours a day reading for how many years to get through all of that, and then have to know what you're looking for also. Right? Like any person can read that, or in other words, a life estate, and it just go right over their head. So you have to be in a place to understand the title part of it too, right? So I don't think it's necessarily intentional. It's a needle in a haystack, right? But on the other side, it's not to their benefit for these kinds of things to exist. That's every one of these things can potentially cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in title insurance things today.
So basically, you just gave them a present.
I'll say this. Someone from Title Guarantee was in one of my presentations and told me I didn't know that term meant that. And that was 10 years ago now. And that was the confirmation for me, like, holy smokes, how are we here? Right? Like, and it was genuine, so you know what I mean? It's
very profound.
Yeah, and I didn't find it. This is not my original research, right? Keon's site taught me this definition, right? This is not me. I was not the researcher who originally discovered and made the interpretation. This is Keon's interpretation.
Is there anyone else that you know of that's gone through the 10,000 pages other than yourself?
We were on a project for AVA of Konahiki and Social Visions of Aina out of Kamakuku Kalani Center for Hawaiian Studies, and we full text transcribed all 10,000 documents, right? So that team, did they read all 10,000? No. I'm a Maile geek. Did I read them all? For the most part, yes. You know, but that's what I enjoy doing on a Friday night while other people are drinking beer. Because, right? Lawrence does the same kinds of things in his research, you know, it's what we do. You know,
so do you know if title guarantee an error issued escrow for a given property under the Maile law? Have they done at least one?
The problem is compounded, the title problem is compounded today by the fact that we've moved to short title searches rather than long title searches, right? So today when you go buy a piece of property, they basically track back until they can find the last title company that insured the place, right? Because then they can just place liability there and done. So we don't have to go back to 1850, you go back to the guy with big pockets. The other title insurance company, oh, they insured it in 1980, they're liable. They said it was good to 1980, right? So it's just short title searches today. There's no long, you're gonna pay $10,000 plus to do a title search on a house all the way back to 1830. They don't do it anymore.
But you don't have to do it. Is that what you're saying?
You don't have to do it anymore. Because, I mean, title insurance is you would like to think it's looking at title, but it's really just liability insurance. So they go find the last entity that's liable, and they can stop there, right? Because if another company insured, then they're holding the bag for warranting the chain of title before that. So you don't have to, right? And you're buying a house today, I'm already paying $800,000. I don't want to pay another 10 for a long title search, right? So there's some practicality, but it's also not, we're not trying to figure out title anymore, we're tracking liability.
So in essence, you could be sitting on a landmine for a defective title?
Yeah, I mean, if you go read an actual land commission award, there's all kinds of conditions. This land can be used as long as there's no alcohol served. This land can be used as long as it's used as a church. This land can be used. This is a 299-year lease that reverts back to the government after 299 years. You only know that if you read. But who else has to read title reports? Unless you're in the title industry, you're not reading these documents, right? Unless you're a historian, like.
So, where Maile lands, do we know where they are and can we pinpoint them exactly?
Yes and no. So, the interesting thing about the Maile is that the Hawaiians transitioned to private property without maps. Place name only. You got Kailua, you got Waimanalo, you got Waikiki, you got Mauna Lua, you got. We all knew where those places were. Didn't need a map, right? And this is where you have to think for a second now. If you're a missionary and you're imposing your system, why are you using Hawaiian place names? They did not do that in Britain. They didn't do that to the Maori. They didn't do that to the Native Americans. They didn't do that for First Nations. They came in, imposed their system. Right? Why are they not imposing their system here? Oh, because they're not in control. Oh, because they didn't do the Maile. Right? And this is where all, how do I say this on camera? There are many, 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 many fundamental assumptions that majority of the Hawaiian public have today about the Maile that are wrong. Right? Maile, foreign imposition. If I'm the state of Hawaii, I want you to believe the Maile was a foreign imposition. I want you to believe that foreigners imposed the Maile. I want you to believe that the Maile didn't save anything for you, didn't preserve, didn't give you any of those fleas that are bothering us today. The sooner you forget and disassociate with the Maile, the easier it is for me to now do what I want to do. Right? We shoot ourselves in the foot by not interrogating those assumptions. Right? If the Maile was a foreign imposition, why Hawaiian place names? Why does my title report go back to an Ahupua'a, Inamoku, in an island? Why doesn't it go to the southwest corner of the northeast corner of the northeast corner of this township in this range? That's the American system, township and range. Why didn't they impose that here? They imposed it in New Zealand. They imposed it in America, North America. They imposed it everywhere else. Well, Hawaii has its system because we were a country 1843. November 28th, 1843, Hawaii becomes a country. We're running the show. And that's the fundamental assumption that we've got backwards, right? That's what Kealusai has brought to light with the Hawaii's recognition as a country, right? Occupation and all of that. That perspective challenges those assumptions. And when you challenge those assumptions, you start to see what our ancestors were doing and what our ancestors left us. Right? Half the things we're fighting for, our ancestors left us. Everything we're fighting for in land, preserved in law. Hawaiian Kingdom law, I can show you all the court cases. Right? But we assume it's not ours, we don't look. Why am I going to read those court cases? It's not ours. It's foreign imposed. Got you. Right? Got you. I want you to believe and disassociate from your own history. Because between 1843 and 1893, that history is ours. We have been taught to think somebody else gave it to us, but we are now rediscovering that's ours. Right? And you see that bubbling to the surface everywhere now. Right? But you still have this underlying thread of, I'm repeating the story that I heard. Maile is bad, Maile this, Maile is that. Right? So the second half of this Royal Patent on Land Commission Award, therefore, Kamehameha, by the grace of God, King of the Hawaiian Islands, by this royal patent, makes known that he has given this day in fee simple unto William Crowningbird. If you just read the document, if you read the royal patent, it tells you, by this royal patent, I have granted in fee simple. How is that transferring no title? By this document, I give you fee simple. That is your deed, that is your evidence, you have a fee title. How to read the document? You don't even have to just read one royal patent. So how does title guarantee have in their glossary this definition that says a royal patent transferred no title? And again, the purpose of me outlining these things is to show how profound the misunderstanding is. I'm not here to throw, oh, Donovan's so smart and title guarantee is so dumb. That's not what this is, right? This is, you would not believe how fundamental the misunderstanding is unless you read 20,000 land documents, right? I sat there and thought, there's no way, right? When I started learning about this, I said, there's no way Ken is right. There's no way the land documents say that. There's no way one man has the interpretation of the Maile correct and the rest of the state of Hawaii, all the smart lawyers in the 1990s, 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, who have been 1,000 or 10,000 plus brilliant minds have been in this industry, and they all missed it. They all missed it.
But they weren't the ones doing the search at the...
Well, that's the thing, is you would only get this in depth if you're doing title searches. You have to be doing title searches, and nobody, right? I mean, that's a handful of people who are engaged in that industry, right? It's not 1,000 people a year doing this. So I understand how, but it's also mind-blowing that, really? Yeah, really. So, Maile 1848, right? If you've seen one of my presentations before, you've been through this rigmarole. Maile, what does it mean? If I pick up the Puku'i dictionary, what's she going to tell me Maile means? To divide, right? So what's being divided? Common answer is the land, right? The Maile, division of lands. In order to understand the Maile, you really have to understand the Maile as a division of rights. As a result of dividing rights in land, people got land. To look at the Maile as a division of land, you're putting the cart before the horse, right? People divided rights in land, people then got land. Okay? So who has rights in land then? Mr. Preza, you're telling us this is a division of rights in land? Where does it say we have rights in land? 1840 Constitution, right? 1839, 1840 was the real beginning of the transition to private property. It was in 1839 where personal and real property are now acknowledged for the Maka'inana class. Before 1839, the Maka'inana did not have a right to their personal property, right? We're in Makahiki season. What do? Chief goes around the island and collects tax. What's he collecting? Your private personal property, right? Chief wants this, chief grabs land in exchange for service, right? The concept of private property where the Maka'inana can exclude a chief from taking their private property did not exist before 1839. 1839 gives the Maka'inana their rights to exclude the chiefly class from their personal property. Right? There's an exclusion. I can't go to, if me and Ben are Maka'inana, I can't go to Ben's lo'i and take his stuff. That's theft, right? We have the concept of theft. We have the concept of personal property within our class. But between the Maka'inana and the chiefly class, there was no acknowledgement barring the chief from coming in and taking personal property. That was kalai'aina, land in exchange for service, right? I get land, you get service. Makahiki, I come and put all of my tribute, you collect. Whatever you want, you get, right? And that was the pono-ness of a chief, was the degree to which he kept that balance. Overstep the balance, Maka'inana revoked. Right? Don't keep the people productive, land's not productive to the degree that other places is productive. Okay? 1839, 1840, huge for property laws. Right? That's the birth of personal and real property for the Maka'inana.
Prior to that, it was feudal, though, at that point, wasn't it?
Prior, depends how you define feudal. I would say yes. Right? And that's one of when you talk about Hawaii, you have to talk about the gray, not the black and white, right? It wasn't feudal, it was communal. Well, actually, it was both, right? The whole concept of ahupua'a was you have communal access within your ahupua'a. If I live in Kailua, I have access to everything within Kailua. That's the communal aspect that people talk about. Do I have access in Waimanalo? Do I have access in Kaneohe? No. Right? You go read the stories. Why does Maile Kukahi create ahupua'a? The population is rising. People start fighting over resources. What is his solution to people fighting over resources? Boundaries. You can gather. You have a right to everything within your boundary, not between. Don't go to Waimanalo and take their stuff. Don't go to Kaneohe and take their stuff. What's in Kailua is yours. Communal within an ahupua'a, not between. Right? That's where we have to get more precise. We can't just do, oh, is it communal? Is it feudal? Oh, it's not feudal. Well, yes, it is. Right? But no, it's not. But yes, it is. Right? We have to get much more precise. Right? For the last 20 years, we've been generalizing. Now we have enough bodies where we can get much more specific. Right? The gods don't want me to move on from the 1840 Constitution. They want us to. The origin of the present government and system of polity is as follows. Kamehameha I was the founder of the kingdom, and to him belonged all the land from one end of the islands to the other. Right? And this is where we have to look at the kauna within the word land. Right? Land, territory of a country, land, real estate. Constitution of 1840 is acknowledging both. Kamehameha I was the founder of the kingdom, and to him belonged all the land from one end of the islands to the other. Kana'iaupuni. To him belonged the sovereignty of the country. land, territory of a country, though it was not his own private property, real estate, right? The land, the sovereignty, the country belonged to Kamehameha, though it was not his own private property. It belonged to the chiefs and people in common. This is where Hawaii is unique, right? You go to other European countries and the sovereignty belongs to the king, the real estate belongs to the king. You then go buy it from the king. In Hawaii, the land does not belong, the real property does not belong to the king, it belongs to the chiefs and people in common. What the king just told you is you own it. So let's go back to that idea that Hawaiians didn't own land, right? That ultimately has genealogy back to this idea that the Maile is bad and it was given to us by another culture. So we reject it, so we resist that notion, right? 1840, the king's telling you, you own it. And you're gonna sit here and tell him, no, I don't? Right? Though it was not his own private property, it belonged to the chiefs and people in common, of whom Kamehameha I was the head. Right? 1846 Principles of the Land Commission. It being therefore fully established that there are but three classes of persons having vested rights in the land. First, the government, second, the landlord, third, the tenant. Right? The Principles of the Land Commission just told the Makai Nana, you are part owner of it. Own it together with the chiefs and government. There are but three classes. First, the government, second, the chiefs, third, the people. You own it. Right? But then in 2019, we want to say we don't own it, so that we can then go fight for it to get it back. Right? Why are we going to take 2 steps backwards? We don't own it, but we want it back. Right? 1840, it's yours. Own the fact that it's yours. Right? If I'm the state of Hawaii, I want you to believe it's not yours. You don't own it. Kaikinbal tells us this, right? We find in 1840 the first admission by the king and chiefs that the common people had an actual ownership interest as distinguished from a mere right of use in the lands of the kingdom. Right? Kaikinbal doesn't have skin in the game. I'm Hawaiian, I want us to own the land, right? I'm biased. Kaikinbal. We find in 1840 the first admission that the common people had an actual ownership. They didn't just have a right to use it, they owned it. Hawaiians didn't own that. Right? And this is ironically what makes us different than other indigenous peoples. Because we have November 28th, 1843, because we were running the show, driving the boat, flying the plane, whatever metaphor you want to use to talk about us being in control and driving the ship called the Hawaiian Kingdom government, which has its sovereignty recognized, right? Other cultures have to fight to get their custom recognized in law. In 1840, our custom began to get codified into law, and those are all the fleas that are bothering people today. What? I want to block off the beach and build my mansion. Sorry. Access rights, subject to the rights of native tenants, these things. Right? All of that's there. Codified into law. We don't have to fight for custom to get acknowledged. It's law. Right? But, oh, states, oh, that's Western stuff. That's European. We don't do the state thing. State's bad. Right? What does Maile mean? To divide who has rights in land? First, the Come on, you don't just get to watch the movie. This is
Personal rights and
interactive learning here.
individual rights.
Who has rights in land? First, the government. Second, the chiefs. Third, the native tenants. How do we know? Because that one guy giving the presentation said.
It's
1839 Declaration of Rights, 1840 Constitution. Right? All of this is in the primary source docs. This is not my opinion. Go read the primary source docs. Right? To Hawaii 715, I believe this is the 1864 court case between Lot and Queen Emma in regard to the estate of Kamehameha IV. This was the beginning of a government as contradistinguished from the person of the king, who was thenceforth to be regarded rather as the executive chief and political head of the nation, rather than its absolute governor. Certain kinds of public property began to be recognized as government property, and not as the king's personal property. Right? If you want to understand Hawaii's transition to private property, you also have to understand how political power transformed through 1840. Pre-1840, absolute monarchy. Post-1840, constitutional monarchy. Absolute powers of the king get divested into the executive department, the legislative department, the judicial department. You can no longer take out the king and get the whole country. His powers have been separated. Right? Very strategic, very smart thing to do to not keep power in one place. You get taken out, and now France got you, Great Britain got you. Invading foreign power has everything by taking one person out. Right? The important words here: public property, private property. Right? Public property for everyone. Private property, not for everyone. In the event of conquest, private property respected, public property confiscated. Okay, we're going to come back to that. Quick overview of the constitutions and what they say about this. 1840, prerogatives of the king. He also shall retain his own private lands, and lands forfeited for the non-payment of taxes shall revert to him. 1852, Article 41. The king's private lands and other property are inviolable. 1864, Article 39. The king's private lands and other property are inviolable. Hawaiian Constitution, king's lands inviolable. Hawaiian Constitution, king's lands inviolable. Hawaiian Constitution, king's lands inviolable. Obviously setting you up for a dun-dun-dun, right? Hawaiian constitutions preserve the king's lands. King's lands inviolable, right? We go back to that interpretation of Naboth's vineyard, right? Using the justice system to kill Ahab, right? To take that which was you could not have, but I want it, but I can't have it. He can't sell it to you. Great division. Why do we need this whole private property thing in the first place? Things are fine. Right? They're not. People are dying. Things aren't as productive. But why do we need the Great Maile? Most of the books, most of the literature out there on the Maile ask and answer the question, why did foreigners want the Maile? Why did William Little Lee, why did this foreigner, why did America, why did the missionaries want the Maile? Right? How about you ask the other question? Why did Kamehameha III want the Maile? Right? The answer to that question, very profound, come for this discussion of crown lands. Right? The king, the records of the discussion in council show plainly His Majesty's anxious desire to free his lands from the burden of being considered public domain, and as such subjected to the danger of confiscation in the event of his islands being seized by any foreign power. Kamehameha III, does he want the Maile he want his lands to be considered public or private? I need a resounding yes.
Private.
Private. Everybody got that? Right? Private. He is interested in the Maile to create private property because private property is respected in the event of imperial conquest. Right? If France comes in 1839 and takes over Hawaii, they get 4 million acres of land because it's all public. It all belongs to the absolute monarch. Never mind your house lot, your house lot, your house lot, your house lot. That's all public property. It all belongs to the king. You hold it at will from the king. Right? The Maile was a means to protect property, both his and Maka'ainana's, in the event of imperial conquest. These are some books they're reading: Elements of International Law, Principles of Nature Applied to the Conduct and Affairs of Nations and Sovereigns, Commentaries on the Laws of England, Commentaries on American Law. All of these books are mentioned in Privy Council. They have these books, they're reading these books. Right? In Kent's Commentaries on American Law, the general usage now is not to touch private property upon land without making compensation. If a foreign power, this is December 18th, 1847, Kamehameha III in Privy Council. If a foreign power should take the islands, what lands would they respect? Mr. Lee gave it as opinion that except in the case of resistance to and conquest by any foreign power, the king's right to his private lands would be respected. The king said unless it were so, he would prefer having no lands whatever. But he asked during the French Revolution, were the king's lands not confiscated? So in this conversation, you see this public-private. Are my lands considered public or private? I don't want them to be considered public. I want them to be considered private. He goes so far as to say, I want my lands registered in a different book from the government lands. Create the government land book and then create the other private land book. I don't want my stuff to be confused. Well, the king observed that he would prefer that his private land should be registered not in a separate book, but in the same book as all other allodial fee simple private titles, and that the only separate book should be that of the government lands. Government, private, public, private distinction. Right? Because Kamehameha wears two hats. He is the executive head of the country. He is also the highest ranking chief. Right? So he holds land in his capacity as a chief, but he also holds land as representative of government. Right? So he does not want confusion for this. He does not want Trump Tower to be considered in the same category as the White House. Right? That's what he's trying to make the distinction. Trump's tower, Donald Trump's private land, does not go to the next president. White House, inherited by the office. Intention, public or private?
What was the question?
Kamehameha III, public or private? You want his lands considered public or private?
Private.
Right. Right? Between January and March 7th of 1848, the chiefs participate in the Great Maile and divide between the chiefly class the approximate 4 million acres of land. 252 Konahikis receive 1.5 million acres. Kauikeoli receives 2.5 million acres. The Maile of 1848 is a division of the chiefs. There are but 3 classes of persons having vested rights in the land. First, the government, second, the chiefs, third, the native tenants. The Maile of 1848 divided out the rights of the chiefly class. Right? We peeled one layer of the onion away. Kauikeoli participated in the Great Maile, not King Kamehameha III. They are the same person. One represents the office of the executive, one represents the chief. The chiefs, through the Maile of 1848, divided out their rights. Now you have to divide out the rights of government, then you have to divide out the rights of native tenants. Okay?
So you're saying then, kingdom, one kingdom lands, the public. But for him as an individual, that's the problem.
We haven't yet created the government lands, which are public. The Konehiki's lands are private, and Kawikyo, all the Konehiki's lands are private. So far, we only have private property. We have not yet created government property, which makes the public part. That's the next slide. So here we have the Maile book. One side of the page, the king's lands, one side of the page, the other 252 chiefs. They go back and forth. These lands are mine, these lands are yours. I don't have rights in yours, you don't have rights in mine. Right? Back and forth for 252 chiefs dividing out their interests. Okay? This is the evidence of Hawaii transitioning to private property without maps. It's a book of place names. It's a list of place names, right? And before people get super technical, yes, were maps drawn? Yes. Was there a mapping project? No, right? The Hawaii Government Survey is not created until the 1870s. It's not until 1890 that they create triangulation, right? So I'm not saying that maps were not drawn. I'm saying that mapping was not a necessary part for this division, right? There's no maps in this book. There's a list of place names. And they can get away with that because the people alive at that time know the divisions and know the boundaries, right? If I'm a missionary, this is not how I'm doing it. Because I don't know where the boundary between Kailua and Kaneohe is and where the boundary between Ola'a and Kea'a is. On every island for all 1,500 to 2,000 hupua, right? Ke ai aku ne au I ke amahele wa mai kai kokomo'i na aina I kakau I amaluna. I hereby agree to this division. It is satisfactory. The lands above inscribed are the king's. I have no right in them. I hereby agree to this division. It is satisfactory. The lands above inscribed are Kamamalu's. She has permission to take them before the Land Commission. Okay? This is a presentation on Crown lands, so I'm glossing much of the Maile details so we can get to the Crown lands, but this is a necessary part of the explanation of Maile of 1848. Okay? The day after the Maile, Kawikeoli takes his 2.5 million acres and divides it between himself, the chief, and himself, representative of government. This, in the first instrument, he retains for himself as his private property, for me and for my heirs and successors forever. This is the king's lands. This is the king's private property, for me and my heirs and successors forever. This is the private property that's in the separate book that's not going to be taken in event of conquest. Instrument 2 creates the government lands. I do hereby give, make over, and set apart forever to the chiefs and people of my kingdom and convey all my right, title, and interest in the land situated here in the Hawaiian Islands between pages 179 and 225, to have and to hold to my chiefs and people forever. This is the government land. This is the public lands, right? Between pages 179 and 225, 1.5 million acres. No maps, list of names. Kawikeoli, want his lands considered public or private? Private, right? Have we seen him at any time express and say, I want my lands public? No, private, 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 all along. Right? June 7th, the legislature acknowledges this act, that expressing our deepest thanks to His Majesty for this noble and truly royal gift, we do hereby solemnly confirm this great act of our good King and declare the following named lands to be the private lands of His Majesty Kamehameha III, Public or private? Private, to be his private lands of his majesty, to have and to hold to himself, his heirs and successors forever, and said land shall be regulated and disposed of according to his royal will and pleasure, subject only to the rights of tenants. Why? Because they own it. Because 1839 and 1840 Constitution said you are part owner in Hawaii. But Hawaiians didn't own land. Right? You see where the problem is?
So the rights of native tenants are embedded in all lands.
There are but three classes of persons having rights in land. First, the government, second, the chiefs, third, the tenants. All 4.2 million acres. But Hawaiians didn't own land.
So native tenants are supposed to have rights now in all undeveloped properties, but
Undeveloped follows the language of the state of Hawaii.
okay.
I would say it's broader and more liberal than that. I would not go so far as to say I can kick you off of your land and claim it today, right? But, and this is where the state has had to make compromises because these fleas are in the law.
They do kind of a quasi thing where they say we have land gathering rights or something like that. And that's kind of their compromise. It's like a
Yeah, and the irony is the compromise is we once had a right to the place we were lived on, now you can pick tea leaves. Right? If you're gonna keep this idea we didn't own land, then we have the right to pick tea leaf. We have the right to gather. If you acknowledge we did own land, we have a right to a house lot. I'll take the house lot. I can grow tea leaf on my house lot. Right? But this is, and because of what I know how damaging this idea of Hawaiians didn't own land is. Right? And I realize 99% of the people who watch this presentation on Facebook are gonna blow me up on Facebook for saying that. Because it's not a popular idea, and every single Hawaiian for the last 20 years has been saying this: we don't own land, we don't own land. That's a Western thing. Interrogate why you think that. How did you come to believe you did not own land? Right? Might take 2, 5, 10 years for you to get out of there, but we'll welcome you when you switch. Right. Legislature, public or private? Private, to be the private lands of His Majesty, Kamehameha III. Right? So here we have Konehiki lands. This is all of our Alii trusts. Right? This is Queen's Hospital, Kamehameha Schools, Bishop Estate, Luna Legal Homes, right? This is the Konehiki lands. Public or private?
Private.
Private. King's lands, public or private?
Private.
Private. Government lands, public or private? Public. 1839, France comes, takes over Hawaii. Hypothetically, what color gets confiscated? Green and green only. Before this division, all 4.2 million acres. After this division, the creation of public and private, only the green. This brings us to 1864. Kamehameha IV dies, right? After the death of the prince, he dies 2 to 3 months later, and because of that tragedy, dies without a will. Due to his death without a will, what happens to the private property, the private lands of Kamehameha IV when you die without a will? It follows the intestate laws of the kingdom, right? So there's a court case between Kapuaiwa and Queen Emma, and they're trying to figure out what happens to 25% of the lands of Hawaii. What happens to the king's lands? Okay. Kamehameha V's claim that these lands are an appanage of the crown, appendage connected to the White House. The White House is connected to the office of the presidency. Right? As such, he describes it as royal domain annexed to the Hawaiian crown. Right? What he's essentially saying is that the crown lands, the king's lands, are government property. It's the White House. It's connected to the crown. It's connected to the office. Right? Therefore, as government property, not subject to dower, not subject to inheritance laws. Right? Because if these lands are private, then it's subject to inheritance laws because Kamehameha IV died without a will. Those inheritance laws would then distribute it, as we're going to find later, to his mother and father and his wife. Lot Kapuaiwa would inherit 0 lands if it went to inheritance law.
So how did it? So Kauikeauli putting his will transfer to Kamehameha.
Kauikeauli had a will, so we didn't have that problem come Kamehameha IV. Kamehameha IV dies without a will. Now we have a problem. Now we have a question to figure out. Green bottles, I wonder if they think of putting down Heineken's during this. Queen Emma's claim that the crown lands are private property, distributable under the statute regulating the descent of property generally like all other private estates. Right? If it's private property, then it is subject to dower and it's subject to inheritance laws. Right? So one saying government, no inheritance law, the other saying private, inheritance laws. If Kamehameha V's claim is correct, then he would inherit, successors to the crown would inherit. The negative would be that it is now considered government property. Right? Queen Emma's claim, if her claim is correct, positive, it's considered private property, which is what we've seen consistently up until this point. Kamehameha III's intention, the legislature's acknowledgement, everything says it's private, but the crown now inherits nothing. Lot Kapuaiwa inherits 0. Right? So, pick your poison, so to speak. Right? Additional evidence of private property. Kamehameha III sold these lands through deeds that are known as Kamehameha deeds. These deeds are registered in the Bureau of Conveyance. The Bureau of Conveyance is an entity still around today. You go buy a house today, you file in the Bureau of Conveyance. That's a Hawaiian Kingdom entity. Bureau of Conveyance registers all of the sales of private titles. So if these are government lands, why is Kamehameha III filing in a entity for private individuals? Right? Kamehameha III's will also acknowledged Kalama's rights to dower. Dower is is a thing that only exists in private property. Right? There is no dower in the government lands. None of the queens had to sign off their right to the government lands because they didn't have an interest in the government lands. They only had an interest in their husband's private property. Kamehameha IV acknowledged Kalama's dower and paid money in lieu of dower. Right? So this acknowledgement of dower is, yes, this is private property because dower only exists for private property. Kamehameha IV also sold these lands as Kamehameha deeds, registering them in the Bureau of Conveyance. Right? These aren't taking the form of royal patent grants, which is how you sell government land. If this is government land, why are we not using a government deed and template? Well, it's not government land. Okay. And the fifth was Queen Emma signed each deed relinquishing her right to dower. So every piece of land that Kamehameha IV signed, she signed off her right to dower. She did not do this for royal patent grants. She did not do this for the sale of government lands because she didn't have an interest or a right in them. So you can see all the monarchs, Kamehameha III, his wife, Kamehameha IV, his wife, Queen Emma, all treating the king's lands as private property. Judge Roberson. Under that act, the lands descend in fee, the inheritance being limited, however, to the successors to the throne. Did we see a limitation on inheritance before in this presentation? What's a fee simple? No limitation on inheritance. What's a limitation on inheritance called? Fee tail. Right? Here we have one stick, the disposition stick, the inheritance of which being limited to successors to the throne. And each successive possessor may regulate and dispose of the same according to his will and pleasure as private property, in like manner as was done by Kamehameha III. Public or private? What did the judge in this court case say? Public or private? As private property. The inheritance, however, being limited to successors to the throne. Private property with a limitation on inheritance. Right? Still private property. The result of this decision, profound. Because by acknowledging that it's private property, you keep the consistency of how it had been treated by everyone prior. You also keep the fact that it's inherited by successors to the crown. Win-win. It's still private. It still gets inherited by lot. Brilliant decision. Right? Not inherited to the heirs of his body generally, inherited to successors to the crown. Right? This is how it goes from the Kamehameha line, Lot Kapuaiva, to the non-Kamehameha Lunalilos, Kalakawas, Liligno Kalanis. Because the inheritor is the office of the crown. Private property with a limitation on inheritance. Right? Brilliant. Right? But this judge gets bagged on because he's a Scottish person from the continent, not even a trained lawyer, but he's a judge in the Hawaiian Kingdom Court. So people look at that and say, who is this guy? Not even a lawyer, but he becomes a judge. You read his decisions, and for me, he gets it. I don't have any other language, but he gets it. Right? And he's involved in most every land case of this time. He was also one of the original land commissioners. Right?
Kind of separated Honolulu, even though it was called Kau. Isn't he still a Kamehameha, but not declared by the father as successor?
Genealogy is not my thing. He may be, I'm not sure. Lawrence, is he? Do you know his genealogy? Is Lunalilo Kamehameha line? Kalakaua Lili'u not, right? In that.
Kalakaua is separated because Honolulu was more Kamehameha bloodline.
Yeah. So I may have misspoke
No,
to include Lunalilo.
he kind of made it sound like there was a wedge in between there and separating to look like three different groups. I just want to kind of, because I've been following this and kind of like it's hair splitting all over the place.
Yeah. The only point I'm trying to make is inherited by the office. And not making any claims to any Lunalilo, Kalakaua, or Lili'u descendants. So, historical or contemporary problem, is this all just history? Right? Oh, interesting historical facts, but how is this relevant to us today? Right? 1894 Constitution, Article 95. Pay attention to the language. Right? If you're paying attention to Mauna Kea and what's going on right now, one of the layers of things going on is a competition for who gets to control the narrative, right? The state of Hawaii wants to be the law followers, and it wants to frame the Kia'i as the law breakers, right? Because if they're the law breakers, then we can now come and enforce the law on the law breakers. We can now use the justice system to enforce, right? Which is the problem they are having now with Kapualoha. How do I bring down the hammer when nobody's in my face yelling at me? Right? Brilliant. Brilliant strategy. That portion of the public domain, that portion of the public domain heretofore known as Crown Land, record scratch. That portion of the public domain heretofore known as Crown Land, is that factually accurate? No. Nope. That's controlling the narrative. Is hereby declared to have been heretofore and now to be the property of the Hawaiian government, and to be now free and clear from any trust of or concerning the same from all claims of any nature whatsoever upon the rents, issues, and profits thereof. It shall be subject to alienation. We can now sell it, because in 1865, Lot Kapuaiwa went to the legislature and asked to make these lands inalienable. The D in the deep sea, disposition, can you guys limit it so we can't sell it? Inalienable. Right? In 1865, Crown lands made inalienable. You cannot buy it. One of the sticks, the disposition stick, was limited. Right? Limiting one stick does not make private property public. It makes a fee simple a fee tail. It makes a fee simple absolute, a fee simple conditional. It does not make public property private property public, right? But you already see the language. That portion of the public domain, right? "25% of Hawaii is hereby declared to belong to the guys who overthrew the country. I hereby declare all of the houses you own in right now to be Donovan's property. Can I please have your car keys and your house keys on the way out? I hereby declare your private property to be mine." That's what they did. By declaration, nothing more. And they shift some language. Instead of it being the private lands, they said, oh, well, it's public lands. Right? And this use of the justice system and the legal system is how 25% of Hawaii is transmuted from private property to public property. Right? Is hereby declared. Nothing more than a declaration. I declare 25% of Hawaii to belong to me. That's how the Crown lands are taken. Right? And they shift language and they shift words, and this is the power of words. In language there is life, in language there is death. Right? Start calling what is private public, start calling what is this, that, and all of a sudden we're confused and now they got 25% of Hawaii.
So when you say now seated, try and disguise a crown, with time people will not put the connection that it's once crown, right? One further step away.
Yep. What they did later in 1895, they confiscate the Crown lands, combine them with the government lands, rename them the public lands. Right? So now we take the potatoes and we take the carrots and we throw them in one pot of stew and we mix them all up. And we hope people get confused in what is what and aren't able to separate the carrots out from the potatoes anymore, and just it's all public lands.
But they still call it seed.
Then in 1898, they're ceded to the United States. In 1959, the United States cedes the public lands back to the state of Hawaii in trust, one of 5 beneficiaries for the betterment of the condition of Native Hawaiians, 1 out of 5, 20%, 20%, OHA 1978 Constitutional Convention to administer the 20%. That's the genealogy of ceded lands.
Were they calling?
Which is only ceded if there's a treaty, no treaty, not ceded. Seized, to take something by force, not ceded.
Previous to this, did they call them crown lands?
Yes. After 1865, they were renamed from the King's Lands to Crown Lands. So between 1865 and 1893, 94, 95, they're called Crown Lands. And that's that designation of inheritable, after the 64 court case, inheritable by the Crown, and also made inalienable in 1865 by the legislature. Right? I just saw an article popped across my browser today. New Zealand just made it illegal for foreigners to purchase land. That did not make public property, and private property, public property. Right? 1865 was a limitation on you cannot sell the crown lands. That didn't transfer private property to public property. In the same way, today, New Zealand didn't transfer all of its lands from public to private by making it unpurchasable by foreigners. Right? Limiting a stick does not shift from public to private. It makes a stick smaller. Right? 1840, prerogatives of the king. He shall retain his own private lands, and the lands forfeited for the non-payment of taxes shall revert to him. 1852, Article 41, the king's private lands and other property are inviolable. 1864, Article 39, the king's private lands and other property are inviolable. Hawaiian Constitution, king's lands protected. Hawaiian Constitution, king's lands protected. Hawaiian Constitution, king's lands protected. 1887, Bayonet Constitution, not by Hawaiians, by insurgents. What do you think happens to this clause? It is the only clause that is removed from the 1864 Constitution. They edit and change other clauses, but they do not remove in its entirety other clauses. Article 39 is the only clause that's removed. Right? This is the, pay attention to how they use the justice and legal system. When you are no longer in control of your country and your laws, this is what happens. Right? 1887, that's removed. In 1894 through Article 95, that which was inviolable is now declared to be public property. How does something that was inviolable now transmute into public property? Right? This is the significance of the loss of government on Hawaii. This is the significance of how our legal system protected us before the overthrow, then was used against us after the overthrow. The reality we are fighting today is because of that loss of governance. Right? It's not because of the Maile. It's not because we transitioned to private property that we lost all of our land. It's because we lost governance, and then they made these kinds of laws and started taking stuff. Right? This Hawaiian land's not stolen, or the West Hawaii Today article, Hawaiian land's not stolen, tried to paint a picture and say, well, we bought all these lands. We didn't steal them. Right? They were stolen. To be proper, you cannot steal immovable property. Okay? There is no such thing as stealing land. right? By definition, real property, immovable, personal property, movable. I can steal anything I can pick up and carry. I cannot put the dirt in my pocket, the land is still there. Right? You cannot steal, by definition, immovable property. Yet, we all know there's, to my knowledge, one person in the entire United States who was convicted of theft of land. Because it doesn't exist. You can't steal, by definition, immovable property. You cannot move the immovable, right? That person in Hawaii today, we all know who that is.
How did he steal the land?
Well, that's how you make charges to character assassinate someone so that you can claim in 2019, well, he's a felon, so to discredit him, right? And that's the narrative that's going on, because I don't want to deal with the content. I don't want to deal with the fact that there's no treaty. I don't want to explain to you how a joint resolution annexes a country in international law. Let's just call him a felon and get his people to discredit him that way. Right? We have to get wise to the tactics. Right? Importance of language, importance of narrative, how people try to control the narrative. And don't deal with the content. Right? In 1910, Lili'u takes this to the US Supreme Court, right? In kind of a last-ditch effort to try and get access to these lands. Judge Fenton Booth, 1910. Although the 1864 Hawaiian Kingdom Court sustained the right of dower in the widow of the king, it is clear from the opinion in 1864 that the Crown lands are treated as public or private property. What did the 1864 court case say? Private, right? It is clear. Under the Act, this is the 64. Under the Act, the land's descendant fee, the inheritance being limited, however, to the successors to the throne as private property. Right? It is clear by the 1864 that it is as private property. Although the court sustained the right of dower, it is clear from the opinion that the Crown lands are treated not as the king's private property, in the strict sense of the word, but they belong to the office and not to the individual. Do you see all the creative use of language here? Right. What you have to understand here is this judge is in a situation where he has to make a violation of Amendment 5, Article 5 of the United States Constitution legal. Right? United States Constitution, 5th Amendment. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without compensation. In 1894, private property was taken for public use, treated as government lands, without compensation. You have just violated the most sacred of American, you just confiscated private property. If America did this today to 25% of America, there would be revolution. The militias would be out, right? All of the NRA, over my cold dead hands are you taking my private property. Yet that is exactly what was done in 1894 to the King's lands, to the Crown lands. Private property was taken, treated as public property without compensation against the United States Constitution. So we have to come up with creative language. Well, it wasn't the king's private property in the strict sense of the word. How else do you justify the taking of private property to make it public? I don't know what I would have said if I was this judge to justify what was done. It's illegal, right? And this is where all of this is This is no sovereignty issue. Has nothing to do with a lack of treaty. It has nothing to do with sovereignty, any of those issues. This is a land title issue. I will pretend for a second we're in America. You violated the Fifth Amendment. No way around it. Let's try this in an American court. You violated the Fifth Amendment. Right? 25 years later, we have Judge Samuel P. King write an editorial on the December 23rd, 1994 Star Bulletin. History of the Crown lands may determine their future. You think? Right? He's writing this in 1994. Right? And he's a judge, right? So he has to be careful with his language. And I'm a historian, so I can say the state doesn't own it. He's a judge. He can't say those kinds of things, right? What does he say? In 1893, after the Revolution, the Crown lands were lumped in with the government lands, which together became the public lands of the Provisional Government and Republic. Thus, what Kamehameha III had set aside for me and my heirs and successors forever as my property exclusively, was transmuted into part of the general land holdings of the government of Hawaii. I will translate for you. Transmuted means they were stolen. Right? A sitting judge cannot sit there and say that outright that these lands were stolen, but when he says these lands were transmuted, what he's saying is, guys, we don't own them. They're going to get hip to this someday. Maybe you should settle sooner than later. In the course of rewriting history and correcting past wrongs, as a start, it would not be unjust for the state of Hawaii to transfer whatever is left of the Crown lands, one half to the trustees of Kamehameha Schools, one half to Queen's Hospital. And in his judgment, 1864, Judge Roberson was wrong and should have gave it to Kekuana'a, which was then went to Kamehameha Schools. That's why he's saying today it should go to Kamehameha Schools and Queen's Hospital, Queen Hama. Right? So you have to ask, why would a judge in 1994 say you should give whatever's left? Right? In the course of rewriting history and correcting past wrongs, as a start, it would not be unjust for the state to transfer whatever is left of the Crown lands out of its hands. Right? You say something like that because you know they don't own it, because they don't have clear title. Right? There's no other reason to give something away that you justly own, right? But they don't own it. They don't own the Crown lands, right? And that's in 1994. So here we are in 2019, 25 years after that, right?
But what does he mean by what is left?
Well, because stuff was sold.
Because they haven't gone anywhere, it's still there.
Well, a whole bunch of it's gone. Right? The thing with the Crown lands, and we didn't get to this, but the thing with the Crown lands is, because all the good government land had been sold by 1893, and between 1865 and 1893, Crown lands or King's lands are inalienable. Right? So you have empty virgin ahupua'a. You don't have a place where somebody has 5 house lots in the middle of an ahupua'a where I have to go buy out. You have vacant ahupua'a. The Crown lands, Naboth's Vineyard is the Crown lands. The Crown lands were coveted by 3 entities. The first entity was Sanford Dole. The second entity was the plantation owners. The third entity was the United States government. All 3 of these entities coveted that which they could not have. That which was inalienable since 1865, right? This is the parallels with Naboth's Vineyard. Naboth could not have sold to Ahab because in that place there was a law that said any inheritable lands are you cannot sell. If you bought land, you can sell that to someone else. If you inherited from your father, you can only pass down to your children, you could not sell, right? So Naboth could not have sold his vineyard to Ahab had he wanted to. Any of the Mois, any of the kings and queens could not have sold the crown lands because in 1865 the crown lands were made inalienable. The entity that is leasing the crown lands from 1865 to 1895 is Sugar. Sugar is not buying the lands from 1840s to the 1850s. Ranches are buying lands because that's the dominant economy between 1840 and 1870. 1872, discover oil in Pennsylvania. Whale oil goes down. Petroleum discovered. Whaling goes down. Sugar starts to rise. Sugar is not the dominant economy until the 1880s, 90s, 1900s. Sugar is not buying the land that they're on, that they're leasing, until post-1900. Sugar cannot buy the crown lands because the crown lands are inalienable. I covet the lands that I'm leasing. I want to buy them. How do I get Naboth's vineyard? He can't sell them to me. Well, let's go use the justice system, remove Article 39 from the 87 Constitution, use the 1894 Constitution to confiscate, use the 1894 Constitution to make alienable. Now, all of a sudden, the inviolable is violated. Right? The third entity is Sanford Dole. Sanford Dole wants the crown lands for homesteads. His perspective on how to build the country is actually opposite of the plantations. He's a Thomas Jeffersonian yeoman farmer. The way you build a country is on the back of small farmers. Right? So he wants to encourage Americans to come to Hawaii to offset the demographic vote. Because Americans are the demographic minority compared to the Japanese and Chinese who came here in the 50s, 60s, 70s, had kids. Those kids give birth on the island. Nationals, right to vote, right? That's where in 1894 you also get the citizenship laws. In order to be a citizen, a voting citizen, you need to speak this level of English to disenfranchise the Japanese, Chinese. Hawaiians are already dying through this period, so they're demographically not worried about the Hawaiians, worried about the Chinese and the Japanese. How do we disenfranchise them? English, make English. It's racism, right? How do we not exclude the Japanese race, but we do it through language imposition? You gotta speak English, right? And so those three entities all covet the crown lands, and they come up with a way to make the inviolable violable through overthrow of the country and use of the justice system. Right? This is where this could not be more parallel to Naboth's vineyard. Right? Both Hawaii in its entirety on one, but more specifically the confiscation of the crown lands. For 4 years and more, these people have confiscated and collected the revenues reserved from all time in order that the chief highest in rank, that is the reigning sovereign, might care for his poorer people. Never were the revenues of these lands included in government treasury where you received the money. Right? They comprise 915,000 acres out of a total extent of 4 million, or about 1/4, and yield an income of about $50,000 a year. They are by legislative act and rulings of the Supreme Court my own property at this day. But notwithstanding, the doctrine that might makes right seems to prevail. Right? Power. Not legal, not law. Right? Power. And not content with depriving me of my income and employing it to forward their own schemes, the present government is now striving to cede these lands, which they do not own and never can own, to the United States. End this presentation with Liliu's quote. "O dear reader, I would like to end here with the words of our Queen. O honest Americans, as Christians, hear me for my downtrodden people. Their form of government is as dear to them as yours is precious to you. Quite as warmly as you love your country, so they love theirs. With all your goodly possessions, covering a territory so immense that there yet remains parts unexplored, possessing islands that, although near at hand, had to be neutral ground in time of war. Do not covet the little vineyard of Naboths so far from your shores, lest the punishment of Ahab fall upon you, if not in your day, in that of your children. For be not deceived, God is not mocked. The people to whom your fathers told of the living God and taught to call Father, and whom the sons now seek to despoil and destroy, are crying aloud to him in their time of trouble, and he will keep his promise and will listen to the voices of his Hawaiian children lamenting for their homes." And that's from Hawaii's story, Hawaii's Queen. Right? You could not have picked a more appropriate metaphor, story, to talk about the Crown Lands and Hawaii.
Thank you.